to say they ought to feel.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to read an article of mine for you, but I also wanted to share the Zoom call of the Sunrise Movement and what they're saying, where they actually admit to crimes. So I'm going to have that run after this article in its full entirety for you. So here's the article titled, "The Cartels Are at War with Us and the UN is on Their Side." Allow me to begin with this statement. The United Nations so-called experts are wrong. Their recent claim that U.S. strikes on drug-running vessels in the Caribbean amount to extrajudicial executions betrays a fundamental misunderstanding of both law and reality. America is not waging war on fishermen. It's defending its people from a foreign onslaught that has killed more citizens than any battlefield since Vietnam. When tens of thousands of Americans die every year from narcotics manufactured, financed, and trafficked by transnational cartels operating with the protection or willful blindness of rogue regimes, that's not a policing problem. It's an attack on the United States itself. The UN's accusation ignores the grim truth. These cartels are not mere criminals. They are militarized organizations with intelligence networks, armored convoys, naval operations, and arsenals rivaling small armies. Their reach extends from Chinese chemical suppliers to South American ports through corrupt states like Venezuela that have become safe havens for a hemispheric drug war. Pretending this is a domestic law enforcement issue is a luxury paid for in American lives. Article 51 of the UN Charter, the very law the UN pretends to defend, recognizes the inherent right of every nation to protect itself when attacked. The method of attack may have changed, but the principle has not. Fentanyl is the modern weapon of mass destruction, invisible, easily transported, and devastating in its effect. When the U.S. acts to destroy the vessels carrying it, it does so not in aggression, but in defense of its sovereignty, its people, and the very concept of civilization against a transnational criminal insurgency. The United Nations condemnation is not just legally flawed, it is morally bankrupt. A body that claims to champion human rights cannot simultaneously defend the rights of traffickers whose trade depends on the mass death of innocents. The right to life belongs to the victims, not to those who profit from their destruction. Under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, the United States has the inherent right to defend itself when faced with an armed attack. That provision, drafted in 1945, did not foresee modern forms of warfare, cyber attacks, bioweapons, or transnational criminal networks operating with state complicity. Yet the framers were clear. Sovereignty does not require suicide. When an organized, sustained, and lethal campaign is launched against a nation's people, that nation is entitled, indeed obligated, to respond with proportionate force. The U.S. response to the drug war is not a violation of the Charter. It is the fulfillment of its most essential principle, the preservation of peace and security through self-defense. To understand this, one must recognize that cartels today function as a de facto insurgent forces, not common criminals. They possess structured hierarchies, command and control networks, and armed contingents capable of engaging in sustained hostilities. The Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation cartels field heavily armed units rivaling national militaries, deploy naval assets through semi-submersibles and narco boats, and operate across sovereign borders with impunity. They do not merely smuggle drugs. They execute cross-border operations that result in mass American casualties. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, reported over 107,000 overdose deaths in a single year, more than all U.S. combat deaths in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Vietnam combined. This is not a social issue. It is chemical warfare. Quote, "Evil doesn't always arrive with explosions. It often seeps in quietly, one body at a time. The weapon has changed, but the intent to destroy remains the same." Tor Maris. International law has already evolved to address non-traditional threats. After the September 11 attacks, the UN Security Council unanimously recognized in Resolution 1368 in 2001 that acts of terrorism can constitute an armed attack, justifying self-defense under Article 51. If the deliberate killing of 3,000 civilians on one day justifies military action abroad, then the slow, calculated killing of over 107,000 civilians every year by transnational networks with state complicity is no less an attack. The difference is in method, not morality. Furthermore, the unwilling or unable doctrine, developed in U.S. and allied state practice, recognizes that when a state is unwilling or unable to prevent hostile actors from using its territory as a base of operation, another state may lawfully act in self-defense. Venezuela, under Nicolás Maduro, has provided safe harbor to traffickers and armed groups that launch operations toward U.S. shores. By harboring these actors, Caracas has fortified its claim of exclusive sovereignty over the territory being used to facilitate an ongoing attack. International law does not protect a government's right to inaction when that inaction enables the mass killing of another nation's citizens. Critics in Geneva claim that these strikes constitute extrajudicial executions, a term rooted in international human rights law, which governs police conduct and peacetime law enforcement. But this is not a police operation. The applicable legal framework is international humanitarian law, the law of armed conflict, which allows lethal force against combatants or organized armed groups in ongoing hostilities. Even under international humanitarian law standards, the use of lethal force is lawful if it is necessary to protect life and no lesser means suffice. Intercepting armed drug vessels on the high seas meets that standards. These are not civilians. They are combatants in a global trade that kills tens of thousands annually. The UN's failure to adapt its interpretations to modern hybrid warfare is not only dangerous, it is complicit. In an era where chemical precursors are shipped from China, processed in cartel-run labs, and deployed into the U.S. bloodstream, the refusal to acknowledge this as a coordinated assault on human life renders international institutions irrelevant. The law cannot remain frozen in 1945 while the battlefield evolves around it. History, too, supports decisive action. The U.S. Navy's actions against Barbary pirates in the early 19th century, criminals who attacked U.S. ships and enslaved citizens, were not seen as extrajudicial executions, but as legitimate exercises of national defense. The principle is the same. When armed predators attack your people from lawless waters, a civilized nation responds with force. The United Nations was built on that very logic after the world watched aggression go unanswered until it was too late. to accuse the United States of violating international law while it fights a modern plague that the international community has failed to confront is both hypocritical and perverse. True international law does not exist to handcuff the innocent. It exists to restrain the guilty. If the United Nations wishes to preserve its moral credibility, it should spend less time defending the rights of traffickers and more time addressing the global networks that poison entire generations. Until it does, the United States will continue to do what every sovereign nation must: defend its citizens from attack by any means necessary and fully within the law. At its core, this dispute is not about law. It's about legitimacy. The United Nations has become paralyzed by its own bureaucracy, more concerned with process than protection. Its experts operate in a sterile environment where theory overrides reality. From Geneva conference rooms, they can afford to split hairs over definitions of armed attack and self-defense because they don't have to bury 107,000 Americans who die every year from imported poison. They call it law enforcement. But for the families who have lost sons, daughters, and parents, it's a war. Slow, silent, and merciless. Quote, "The UN no longer stands between nations. It kneels before them. It gives comfort to the very hands that traffic in chaos and calls that surrender diplomacy." Tormaris. The UN's condemnation of U.S. counter-narcotics strikes reveals something deeper: a refusal to admit that the architecture of post-World War II international law no longer fits the shape of modern warfare. The UN was built to prevent tanks from crossing borders, not fentanyl from crossing oceans. Its experts cling to outdated categories: combatant, civilian, armed conflict, because acknowledging that non-state actors and chemical networks now function as weaponized systems would mean admitting that the world has outgrown their control. That, more than anything, is what they fear. There are also political incentives at play. The Human Rights Council, which appointed these experts, includes regimes like China, Cuba, and Venezuela, states whose hands are soaked in the blood of political prisoners, yet who use the council as a shield against accountability. Condemning the United States serves a dual purpose. It distracts from their own abuses and weakens the international legitimacy of Western power. For China in particular, which exports the precursors that fuel the fentanyl crisis, every report that paints the U.S. self-defense as aggression is a geopolitical victory disguised as moral outrage. This is not the first time the UN has done this. The pattern is the same. The defenders are scolded and the aggressors are rebranded as victims. The truth is simple. International law is not static. It evolves with the threats it faces. When the law is used to protect those who destroy life rather than those who defend it, it ceases to serve justice. The United States, like any sovereign nation, has the right and duty to defend its citizens. If the United Nations cannot recognize that a synthetic chemical designed to annihilate a population constitutes an act of aggression, then it's not defending peace. It is defending paralysis. The strikes in the Caribbean are not extrajudicial executions. They are acts of measured defense in a war that the rest of the world refuses to fight. The cartels, emboldened by corruption and foreign supply chains, have weaponized chemistry and chaos. The United States has chosen to fight back, and that is not only lawful, it's moral. If the United Nations wishes to be taken seriously in the 21st century, it must evolve beyond its Cold War vocabulary. It must recognize that sovereignty comes with responsibility, that harboring killers, whether they use rifles or laboratories, is a violation of the peace the Charter was meant to preserve. Until then, America will continue to act, not out of arrogance, but out of necessity. Because when the law fails to protect the living, it is not the defenders who stand in violation of justice. It is those who mistake inaction for virtue. Perhaps it's time the United States reconsidered what exactly it's funding. When an institution built on the ashes of tyranny now echoes the talking points of regimes that practice it, The cost is no longer just financial, it's moral. The Chinese Communist Party's quiet domination of UN committees and councils has turned the organization into a stage for censorship disguised as consensus. This latest condemnation is not an act of global conscience. It is a performance directed by those who profit from America's restraint. If the UN cannot distinguish between defense and destruction, then maybe it no longer deserves the privilege of America's support. Quote, America should not fund its own condemnation, especially from an institution that long ago stopped defending the free world and started defending those who wish to conquer it. Tor Maris. On a side note, truth is that psychological operations are the most efficient weapons of mass destruction ever engineered. They don't vaporize cities. They hollow out the human mind. They erase conviction, rewrite memory, and make people question the evidence of their own suffering. Confusion becomes the perfect battlefield and belief the casualty. Governments understand this well. The longer populations wander through doubt and disorientation, the less they resist. So, they preserve the chaos, nurture it. Even because a confused people are easier to govern than a conscious one. Until we name psychological warfare for what it is, a weapon designed to fracture reality itself, we will keep mistaking manipulation for governance and captivity for peace. If you like my work, you can tip or support me via my Tip Me page on ToriSays.com or subscribe to me on Subscribestar. I'm 100% people funded. I have no sponsors. You can also follow and subscribe to me on Rumble, Locals, or subscribe to my Substack and X. I am 100% people funded. Thanks for listening. My Digital Dominion series is now on Amazon, Volume 1, 2, and 3. I'm also taking pre-orders for Digital Dominion Volume 5 on my website. Now stay tuned for this exclusive Sunrise Movement call, where they admit to crimes and tell you exactly what they intend to do at some point next spring. Enjoy the show.
We're going to hear from some of the Portland organizers on what they've been learning on the ground as they've been facing down the National Guard and ICE with all kinds of swagger and joy. So we're going to hear more about that in a moment. We're going to facilitate a mini training on how to do mass non-cooperation in the face of authoritarianism. And then at the end, we're going to have some space for free time to discuss any questions, organizing, strategic and otherwise, coming up around anti-authoritarian organizing. So our opening and welcome is going a little long, but that's what we're doing right now. 10 minutes, Portland 15, AA mini training, 25 minutes, discussion application, 20 minutes, 5 minutes to close. That's the vibe. Let's do it. Okay. Now, I invite you to just connect your feet to the floor, take a deep breath, really sit in your body. Here we are. It's October 21st, 2025. We are about 9 months into, maybe to the day, 9 months into this second Trump administration. Some folks, some researchers have been doing some analysis of all the actions that the Trump administration has been doing. It has counted 1,581 as of today of actions, statements, and plans that echo those of authoritarian regimes and that may pose a threat to democracy. So their flood the zone strategy has been, you might be feeling overwhelmed by it to a certain extent, and it is by design and is also grounded in the data. But they've been doing a heck of a lot to undermine democratic institutions, the rule of law, dismantling the federal government. They've been suppressing dissent and controlling information, dismantling protections and rights, and a whole lot more. And in particular, we've been seeing a real increase in the level of violence that has been a part of the administration's strategy. In Chicago in particular, we saw them use Black Hawk helicopters to this middle of the night raid of a South Shore apartment building. And they put kids in, separated them from their families, and zip tied people in the middle of the night, elderly, dragging people out who are half clothed in their pajamas in the middle of the night. And it's just like a real escalation in the violence. Also here in Chicago, speaking mostly from my example, ICE has shot two people. They've killed one person, and they've shot another person. So they have escalated to the point of killing here. Um, and that is very scary. And it's the reality that we're facing currently. And it's definitely not the reality that we hope for. So if you're with me still, take another deep breath, feel your feet on the floor, and we'll go to the next slide. Now, some of the other things that we've been starting to see, these are all headlines from the last week. We're starting to see institutions and leaders step up in the pushback, in the non-compliance, in the non-cooperation. We saw major media outlets, including conservative outlets, including Fox News, reject to sign the new Pentagon press restrictions. We've seen 7 universities reject the Trump administration's loyalty oath demands, in part because of organizing led by Sunrisers and other students at those universities. A number of both Republican and Democrat appointed judges have been really pushing back and issuing a number of rulings. Here in Chicago, we got a ruling, temporary restraining order on ICE because of the amount of violence that they've been using. And we also got an order from a judge making them bring down a fence that was making it impossible for folks to even get close to the ICE facility here. And 6 months ago, this wasn't the case, but it is the case now. Senate Democrats actually are holding the line for now. And that is a good change that we have been seeing in the last few weeks. Let's go to the next slide. Now, the other, piece of the reality, just to make sure we're all kind of aware of the state of play, is there's a high likelihood that as soon as tomorrow, if I'm not incorrect, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody in the chat, the Supreme Court might issue a ruling negating the Voting Rights Act, particularly Section 2, which is a provision that bans racial discrimination. The Civil Rights Movement helped win through much struggle. And that could open the door for GOP-controlled states to redraw at least 19 congressional seats to be more in their favor, which would help them try to secure the congressional majority that they currently have in 2026 and beyond. So while we're starting to see institutions step up and fight back because of pressure and movement organizing, including the huge protests on Saturday that many of us were part of, Trump and his team are also escalating their fight. So that's where we find ourselves. Let's take one more deep breath, feel our feet on the ground, and then I'm going to pass it to Aru. Thank you.
Okay, can y'all, these don't, okay, great. Can y'all hear me okay? Is my audio and video fine? Great. Okay, amazing. I'm in a hallway of a college campus where the Twin Cities Hub is running a anti-authoritarian training right in the room behind me. So that's fun, but that's why I'm here. Okay, so I'm doing a little report back on a really cool meeting that I just got to go to in Italy, where there were basically like leaders of anti-authoritarian movements across the world met up together to share learnings and lessons about what's working in different countries, and to be like, how do we actually have a shared assessment and make sure that we're in community with each other? And it was really awesome. I talked to several of the people there who are willing to do like longer presentations about the movements in the countries that they are in. So maybe we'll have one of those in the future on one of these calls. But I'm going to give like the 5-minute version of a report back, and there are many more hours of learnings about other countries that we can do. So we basically we had presentations from people who led protest movements in a lot of different countries. I couldn't load up pictures, but Chile, Guatemala, Italy, Serbia, Slovenia, Georgia, Bangladesh, Hungary. They did really cool things. I was really inspired by some of the people in Hungary who, like, after Viktor Orban, the dictator there, made Pride illegal, organized Budapest Pride, which was like the largest march Hungary had like ever seen, basically. And it was this giant pride parade in opposition to making Pride illegal, which was really cool. I was also really inspired by the people in Bangladesh. One of the boys there, he's like 22 and was like leading a lot of the student protests, and the government really cracked down on them in like July of 2024, and the government actually like killed 2,000 student protesters, like 2,000 was just like a huge number. And he was like telling me about how he like had a lot of friends who were like beaten and killed by the government. And I was like, weren't you scared? Like, how did you manage to keep going? And he was just talking about how it like wasn't even a choice, and like just millions of them like flooded into the streets and toppled their government. And now they formed a new political party and they won proportional representation. And the next election, they think they might win a huge amount of seats. And it was just like super inspiring to hear about like the courage that they had. And I'm not going to talk about every single country. I like found so many of them so interesting and really inspiring. Hopefully you guys can talk to some of these leaders later, but I wanted to pull out some of the like top line lessons that I reflected on, all like overall altogether. Go to the next slide. So I divided into strategy and tactics, and these were things that made me like, oh, this was like a new way of thinking about it. That's like maybe a little different than how I was thinking about it before. One is like really a huge emphasis on mass mobilization. I think in Sunrise we've like done a wide variety of types of actions of like being able to use small numbers of people to have a really outsized impact. And that's awesome. And I think that's really useful. And the thing that was like in common with like every single example is that there's no way to get around needing like massive, massive, massive scale in key locations. And I thought that was like just a good lesson in agitation for me of being like, okay, this is like actually really a thing that we need to be really very serious about if we are going to try and win. And there was also a really interesting thing of like the link between mass mobilization and being able to like win power afterwards. Like there were several places that were able to successfully get rid of their dictator, but then not translate that into political wins afterwards. And then you end up with like half democracies that have the same problems that led to the rise of like authoritarianism and fascism in the first place, which could totally happen in our scenario, is sort of what happened in 2020 in a different way. And so there was also some very interesting lessons about like how you actually do that. A lot of places passed like proportional representation laws right after, like if to be successful, passed proportional representation laws, created new parties. Often like the leaders of the protest movements were like leaders of the new parties. Obviously the US, our two-party system makes it pretty hard to create new parties, but you know, there are like mechanisms that we could use to do that. So that was like a really interesting lesson of like how different movements really made sure that the mass mobilization was able to translate into political power. So that was interesting. Another really common thread is almost every single example talked about corruption as a really key issue. And I think it's like taps into some of the basic feeling of unfairness of like my life is hard and your life is easy, and that's like unfair. And talking about corruption. So that was like interesting. And then maybe the one that was like most agitational for me, or like was like hardest for me to reckon with, is that I think one of Sunrise's greatest strengths is that we are able to really push public opinion and change public opinion. And it's like what our mission has been for many years. And one thing I was really noticing in these presentations is that for the most part, these people were like not trying to push public opinion. They were like staying maybe like half a step ahead of it, but not like 5 steps ahead of it. And they were really trying to be like, what is really widely felt already, and we're going to stick to like the values, the terms, the things that are already like tapping into majorities. And that was interesting for me. I was like, oh, that's like that's not always how we think. Sometimes we're like, we're gonna change the public, and I think that totally made sense for the era that we were in. And this was like a helpful way to think about like how is campaigning and organizing under authoritarianism like different than maybe campaigning in the past has been. So those were really interesting lessons for me on like a strategy level. And we can go to the next slide. And then there were also just some things about like the culture and tactics that people used that I liked and I wanted to pull out. One, this is related to the scale one and also the like widely felt one. They like really emphasized welcoming everyone and like not making it hard to join and not making a lot of like dividing lines to whether you are in or out of the movement, and not just like making it really easy to join. One thing that I really appreciated was there was a lot of like just do it energy. Like a lot of them were like, yeah, we don't sit around for a long time debating or discussing things, we just like go do it. And I think that was helpful as someone who sometimes like has, I think there's a lot of discussion and I fall into that myself. I was like, okay, like less searching for the perfect strategy, more like try a thing, learn a thing, try a new thing. and don't get caught up on whether it's perfect or not. And so that was like a really good like cultural push that I liked, and I like wonder how to bring a lot of like just do it energy into Sunrise and into our base. Um,
Aru, you're muted.
Sorry. I just became muted, right? Okay,
Yeah.
cool, great. The another thing that I really admired was like there was just a lot of emphasis on giving away the keys. I think this is like extra relevant in the U.S. Because our country is like geographically bigger than any other country that was presenting. I guess Chile is long, but like, whatever. We have a lot of yeah, it's just like a very big country. And I think that makes it even more important that we have like many teams in many places that feel ownership and ability to move on a strategy and doesn't feel like everything has to like wait for approval or come from a central place. And I think like I was really thinking about how do we give a lot of people the training and skills needed to feel like they are pioneering ways to stop authoritarianism in your city, and then we share them like on these calls. So anyway, maybe these calls are how we do it. And yeah, so that was another learning. There was one that maybe I think is a little bit more relevant to our like national organization, which is like be really relentless in the online to offline mobilization. Like because a lot of these were youth movements, they all had like pretty interesting ways of like I don't know if you guys saw how in Nepal they did a lot of like Discord organizing. In Slovenia, they had like really intense digital like strategies. They were like I think they were saying that they just had like a 6-person volunteer content team that would make like 20 Instagram posts a day on their account, which is just like really high. And we were kind of like, oh wow. And they just really valued like again the just do it energy, put out a lot of content, and then constantly be asking people to join. So that was interesting. And then another thing they really talked about was like following your local culture pretty closely, which I think the Portland stuff we'll maybe talk about in a second, but like just the importance of that in being able to actually be successful in your organizing. The other thing that I forgot to write on here, there was just also a lot of like really helpful reflections on um, like being honest with each other about the scale of repression that was going to be faced. Like several of them were like had like fled their countries because they were exiled from them. And so there were also like really interesting, like one of the groups talked about how they would like hold like group therapy sessions every month to sort of like help people sort of process through that. They had like security protocols to share. And I think one of the things that I found really inspiring and like why I want to bring them to talk to us is that these were just like really brave people who have like faced a lot of shit and decided to keep organizing anyway. And I found it really inspiring to like listen to them and be like, okay, wow, I have a lot to like, yeah, just emotionally and spiritually learn from how you pulled courage in those moments. And I think like that's something that we are all going to need to pull at together. Um, yeah, that was a lot of talking. I'm curious if people have questions or thoughts. Or actually, Deja, I don't know how our timing works, so maybe just questions. 2 minutes for questions.
I had sort of a question. This might be something that we cover later, but you're talking about like mass mobilization and welcoming in everyone, and I was kind of wondering how that works together with like Sunrise moving to a membership model, and like we do have a little barrier to entry.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it was also a question that I wrote that question in my notebook when I heard that as well. I don't have an answer. I think I'm like, maybe it's like being more loose with like how we welcome people in the door and then like letting people come to things and first meetings without immediately expecting them to be a member is like my first thought. I don't know, Deja, if you have thoughts here, but I do think that's an active tension that like, yeah, but anyway.
Yeah, I think it's less a tension and more of an opportunity. I'm like, there will be moments where hundreds of thousands of people hopefully want to knock down your door, and it's just not the moment of high momentum and energy that we want to keep them. Like we are building a movement and an organization for the long haul, and I think membership is a way for people to like commit. And so I think in the moments where thousands of people want to join, you probably throw on a mass training and you probably don't prioritize a membership ask, but like in that training, you then like get people really committed and then can use the membership ask as the ask. Um,
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Deja was like not treating it necessarily as the first drug, but the second. And I'm seeing this conversation about the first two. What are the first two that people are referring to? Is it the just do it energy and welcome
Yeah.
everyone? Okay, cool. Yeah, I agree. Those are like countercultural a little. Maybe let's do Rowan and then Adam, and maybe ask both your questions and then I'll answer.
In line with the last question, we've been like very strict on defining ourselves as a youth organization and have set like a cutoff age. Are are we planning on sticking to that moving forward if the goal is to get as many people as possible? Or what are the views, ideas around how we can integrate older folks into the movement in a little bit more of an active role?
Yeah, I mean the thing that I've been using more in my hub is like using the word youth led more, and I think it's like similar to what Deja said of like the organization that we are building for the long haul is like a youth organization because that's like who we are and it's our culture and like it's the strategic value add that we think we're adding. But I think like if we're training some old people who are like 50 or 60 or whatever, I'm like I don't think that's a problem. Like we just want to be training a lot of people and getting a lot of people to doing things with us. So I think it's like sort of the membership crowd. Deja, does that track with what you're thinking too?
Yeah.
Cool. And Adam.
Yeah, my question was on balancing kind of meeting people where they're at with security, because this is like a long-standing pet peeve of mine of like insisting on using Signal for everything, even not like not risky activities can be off-putting to folks instead of using like WhatsApp, Slack, Discord that people are already on. So did they discuss that dimension?
They did a little bit. Deja, do you want to say your thing and then I can say?
No, Rue, you should share because it's about what they shared.
Well, one thing that I appreciated that I feel like we've been trying to bring more in Sunrise is they were very clear, like majorities are your best protection. And also like you want to plan a lot of things that don't feel unsafe to people. And like people need avenues in that don't feel unsafe, which doesn't mean we never do unsafe things, obviously, like we will. But like treating it more as like what committed people are doing like less safe things and like the people who are walking in the door are doing safe things because that's what they want to do and therefore that should match the platforms in place that you are organizing on. So like yeah, like the things that you are walking in, like you don't want to make everyone have to have like 3 reference checks before joining your highly secure Signal group if they're like coming to a march, which obviously no one's doing that exactly, but like that's a hyperbole. Deja, were you gonna say something? Okay, cool. Rowan, I think like it's mostly about like making sure that you have a culture that your members are like excited about and want to hang out in. Because I feel like so much of what makes us a fun place to be is like some of our being a youth movement and being like as long as we can maintain that, I think that's like one of the crucial parts of like our membership part. Um, cool. I guess I'm out of time for questions. That was 2 minutes. So I will pass it to the Portland folks.
Yeah. Uh, Hi, everyone. My name is Jacob. I use he, him pronouns. I'm one of the members of the Sunrise, one of the leaders of the Sunrise PDX Hub here in Portland, Oregon. And if you're unaware, there's been lots of things happening in Portland, and we think it would be cool to share a little more about what's been going on and kind of what we're doing to respond to it. Could you go to the next slide? That's not me, though. That's me. Cool. So. Back in like late September, Donald Trump started labeling Portland again as another war zone, like he had done 5 years ago, and was contemplating bringing the National Guard, and then eventually like announced that he was going to federalize troops from the Oregon National Guard and send it to Portland. Um, like the recent history is that they were announced to come, and then a judge blocked it, and just yesterday or the day before, the appeals court allowed Trump to send the National Guard back to Portland. But even amidst that like whole pause, there's a lot of stress and pressure from really everyone in the city, trying to understand what it's going to look like to have National Guard in our city. If you can go to the next slide.
Yep, give me 1 second.
Oh, good. I'll keep sharing. What I was going to share is that a lot of people had fears, and pretty immediately, city and state officials were denouncing this effort as um, as a bad move, but more importantly, trying to get people to not take the bait and be calm. And what I mean by that is, at least from like the politicians' perspectives, it's like if we show ourselves to be safe and like bend in and like not do anything, that we are um, like gonna prove Trump that we are like peaceful. But that's not really what we at Sunrise PDX or most people that are organizing when Portland wanted to do. We still wanted to show our voice and we still wanted to be angry. But the big thing is that what Donald Trump wanted to get out of us was like a reaction of extreme violence and use it as like an example to repress other cities across Portland or across the United States. So for us at Sunrise PDX, we wanted to figure out actions that still showed our discontent with Donald Trump, but did it in a way that like really showed ICE agents and National Guard as villains. We can go to the next slide. On this, like on the left here is just like some text that was from a Sunrise National post talking about Portland. Go back one more. Yeah, thank you. What he really wanted is he wanted these pictures of Antifa or Black Bloc. Like Antifa is just like a dumb term that means anti-fascist. It doesn't actually mean anything. But what he really wanted was Black Bloc, which is like this image on the right of people wearing all black and masks and being unidentifiable. And that's like a really good tactic in some scenarios, especially when Portland has a huge history of like far right, ultra nationalists, white supremacists organizations like the Proud Boys or even the KKK trying to dox protesters. So, like, Black Bloc has its place. But what Trump really wanted was to come to Portland with the National Guard and try to recreate photos that looked like 2020 during the Black Lives Matter protests and try to get photos of Portland looking very dangerous. And I think Sunrise PDX knew this, and I think the general public of Portland knew that as well. And so, kind of very organically, we found a different strategy that made us look really, really, really cool and or funny and make Donald Trump look really dumb. And you probably have seen the frog across the world. But the protest frog or the inflatable frog in Portland is kind of what really jump started or like changed the narrative. We were talking a lot in Portland that the way to do good protests is to try to pit a hero and the villain. And if a viewer can't look at it and figure out who is the hero, who is the villain, then like that narrative is broken. So like on that left image, that's photos from 2020. That's with tear gas, people fighting cops and National Guard in Portland. And like, beat as you will, what the protesters were doing, I think is really brave and awesome, but it doesn't like fit the narrative that we want, which is that Portland is like a fun, quirky city and that ICE and National Guard is like unnecessary and overwhelming. So this picture on the right is like a perfect encapsulation of it. Go to the next slide, please. I think what really people really took from it is like this frog really was a revolution in like protest culture here in Portland, where if they wanted to see a show of like violence, and we did give them a show, but it was like uninterrupted improv theater week after week after week. So like on the top right, there's someone that's having a tea party right in front of the ICE facility. Like all these inflatable costumes are going all around. There's the unprecedented brass band that wears bananas. And like I think Sunrise had a place to help build that narrative. But a lot of it happened very organically, and I'm very fortunate to live in a city where people are smart enough to like have good protest culture. If we can go to the next slide. Sunrise still did things though at the ICE facility. We still decided to go and protest and have our own actions. Like a day after the National Guard was announced to come to Portland, we dressed up in angel outfits and went to the ICE facility and had this distracted from the Epstein's files photo, which went pretty viral on Reddit and Twitter. Um, again, like really trying to build a narrative that Trump is not doing this for any good reason whatsoever. We also went to the ICE facility a few weeks later and played cards in Pickles outfits and got photographed with the New York Times and um, have some really like good videos from that as well. Um, Next slide. We also came back and organized with other organizations in Portland. So, for example, that central photo is the Secret Roller Disco, which is a group in Portland that hosts weekly or bi-weekly roller skating parties on different parking lots and streets in Portland. It's like from 7 to 9 on Thursdays. And we had a member from Sunrise who actually is a DJ for Secret Roller Disco. And so we coordinated with them and another dance organization to basically hold a rave in front of the ICE facility and take video of it. And the video ended up going viral on Instagram. Similarly, we have like a baseball team, like a college baseball team called the Portland Pickles, which is like a beloved Portland staple. And again, we had another Sunrise organizer that had connections to the Portland Pickles, and we managed to get them to like support and take a photo at the ice facility, which gathered 1.4 million impressions on Twitter. So finding ways to like help build that narrative was really helpful for us. And then lastly, that photo on the left for in terms of actions, we really focused on going to No Kings and having a good presence for songs and just like showing good Portland spirit or good Sunrise spirit. So next slide. Um, I want to just quickly sum up our actions and then talk about what we've been doing kind of outside of actions. But I think Portland has been really awesome at showing the National Guard and ICE to be unnecessary and being so viral that it's like taking the main narrative of our country that like ICE is not needed and that our like Antifa protesters are just like inflatable frogs or wizards. So I think I'm really proud that Sunrise can or as Portland can take that space and I'm hoping that other cities, if the National Guard is like deployed there, can try similar tactics. But that's just like a narrative battle. Um, there are other ways that we're using this momentum of kind of like of national focus to try to organize our communities more deeply. And so Sunrise PDX is a very kind of older hub where most of our people are post-college. And so we're actually going to where students are and trying to organize. I think we have about 50 or 60 pledge strikes, Deja, at least from No Kings, and we're continuing to do more. In terms of school organizing, we're actually hosting class reps inside of high schools and colleges, like connecting with teachers and doing presentations. And our goal is to be able to build hubs in every single high school and college in our city and be able to coordinate with have like a mass coalition of Sunrise hubs in our city. Um, and we had a conversation about trying to organize older people or people that are not 35 and under. And I think we found a lot of benefit in doing neighborhood organizing. So hosting trainings about anti-authoritarianism with the masses and then encouraging them to start doing community dinners or organizing their affinity groups around politics and trying to get people together and actually caring about fighting fascism. Um, and then, like as I just talked about, we were doing strike canvassing. We did that a lot at No Kings as well, where we're handing out. Actually, we're doing a lot at businesses where we're going to coffee shops, hairdressers, other retail places, and we're talking to workers, and we're encouraging them to sign a strike pledge to be ready to take action together in May or whenever we decide a general strike is best fit. Um, and then I guess lastly, we're also focusing on a specific union effort with Wells Fargo. We know that to have a successful general strike, we need schools organized and workplaces organized and just people organized in general. And one way we're helping is to try to help Wells Fargo workers win their first contract. Wells Fargo is a terrible polluter. and is like a chronic union buster. And most people that work at Wells Fargo offices are under 35. So being able to actually talk to people of your age and encourage them to start a union, get up with a union, um, is we think to be very powerful. So that's kind of my summary of what's been going on in Portland. I'm happy to share more about like tactics we're doing outside of our actions or just how actions have been going. I'm happy to answer any sort of questions. Oh, thank you all. Yeah, Terry.
So for these actions, have you been able to loop other like Portland area or like nearby near Northern Oregon hubs? 'Cause I know Sunrise Cornwallis, they've been doing a lot of
Mhm.
stuff too. So have you been able to loop them in, to these as well?
Yeah, we have like good, I'd say we have good connections with hubs that are like out of the Portland area, like Sunrise Eugene or Sunrise Corvallis. But I think in terms of these actions, since they're so distant from Portland, it's hard to organize like that in particular. What we have been able to organize with is other high school and college hubs. So um, for No Kings, we decided we wanted to build a Sunrise contingent for the actual march. And so we had members from Lewis and Clark College and Grant High School and um, Beaverton Hillsborough High Schools come together for like a combined march. I think we're trying to work our like coalition or like broader Sunrise like organizing muscle. And so we're using these protests and other actions as a way to start building that like trust and collaboration between other hubs. In terms of like focusing specifically on these ICE actions, I think because it's been so rapid response, we've been um, uh, very intentionally organizing with like our core Sunrise PDX organizers. But when it comes to stuff that we have more time to plan, being able to do um, like a coalition action has been really helpful. Do we have any demands for local or state officials? Um, we, at the moment, no. I think a lot of those like demands for a general strike will come out of like the work of organizing our communities and will be hopefully driven by like the mass movement of people. In terms of like our immediate local actions, there's nothing for us to really demand unless we have the people ready to go on strike, or people that are like knowledgeable enough to be able to organize their communities. So um, we're handing out flyers and doing trainings as a way to build that like knowledge up to do kind of mass non-cooperation. Sarah.
Yeah, we'll take two final questions from Sarah and then Jared.
Sweet. Thanks, Deja.
Thank you so much for sharing. This is super, super helpful. I was curious to hear about like what the relationship is between your hub, and the Wells Fargo Workers United. Like, what's kind of like the delegation of like what you do,
Mhm.
and how you're like working in collaboration with them.
Yeah, good question. We are kind of following their materials for canvassing workers. A lot of our canvases are just handing out materials and kind of planting that seed for branches to join the union. Our like organization with them is mostly supporting their efforts here in Portland and trying to be successful in helping organize branches. A lot of the like strategy and like tactics that are being used for supporting the Wells Fargo Worker United are being led by staff from other organizations. That's not Sunrise. So we're just kind of jumping on as a way to help. But that link I can post in the chat is like a national online training that's talking about the same materials that we're using to canvass Wells Fargo branches in Portland. So you can do that really anywhere in the country because there's Wells Fargo's everywhere in the US. Okay. Last question, Jared.
Jacob, thank you so much for talking about this. It's unbelievable what y'all have done so far in Portland, and I'm really excited to keep an eye on what continues to happen. Can you talk to us a little bit, especially, you may have already mentioned this, but like, um, with your current organizing for the Green New Deal, how do you incorporate like um, the 2028 general strike considerations with your need to support frontline communities?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think um, I think we feel like our needs for a general strike is to find like the basic demands that everyone can really agree on. I think we're trying to build mass understanding with people in Portland that what's happening right now is wrong and that we should be organizing to do something about it. Um, in terms of uh, making sure that our demands are rooted in the needs of frontline communities, or that we are actually pulling in and absorbing members that are not just upper class white middle-aged people, is actually going to events and supporting local things that are already happening in our communities. So going to um, block parties or other organizations that whose like base of members are already um, our community is people that we want to be talking to. We're not trying to uh, I guess try to like coerce someone into organizing, but in general, we think that our way to build relationships and have a Sunrise Hub that's actually multiracial and cross-class is to start building trust by going to these events and just having like a positive presence there.
And in you attending those events, actually, no, I'll follow up with you on this.
Sounds good.
Yes, encourage you to connect. And thanks so much, Jacob. I've been like watching what y'all are doing in Portland on the Instagram. I talked to Noah, and as someone in New York who's anticipating the National Guard coming, likely
Mhm.
after Zoran is elected, really helpful to get a sense of what y'all are doing. Thinking about how to pull that into our organizing in New York City. So maybe we can give some love in the chat for everybody in Portland.
Yeah, thank you all. Thanks, Deja.
And I'm going to keep us moving. So we're going to do one last little bit and then we'll open it up for just like major takeaways or things we want to pull into our organizing. And before I do that, I think it's just helpful. We tell stories as organizers. And maybe I want to invite folks, if you felt like any sense of fear over the past few months, drop a star in the chat. And then maybe if a couple people just want to drop in the chat, like what was a specific moment where you felt scared? Because I remember when Charlie Kirk was murdered and I was sitting on the bus in New York City, I was terrified of like taking action in Sunrise, honestly, for a second, thinking about what happened. And so maybe folks, as you're dropping stars, if you want to drop just like a moment where you especially felt that fear. Yeah, election night 2024. Let's get a couple more. And then I want to tell you all a little bit about myself. Yeah, Paul, my friend, called me from ICE where he was being held. Let's get a couple more. The signs in my hometown businesses saying honk for Charlie Kirk, scared to pass through the TSA at the border, bombing shipping boats. Yeah, as so many of those come in, I've been reflecting a lot about fear because I've felt it a lot more than I have in a while. And often in Sunrise, I like tell this story of self. So my name's Deja. I use she, her pronouns. I grew up in Chicago. My dad on the left was a really big fisher and he took me fishing with him. And there I like fell in love with the water. I'm like supposed to be a marine biologist, but I'm out here trying to stop climate change because these assholes and the fossil fuel industry and the Democrat, all of them. But I tell the story about swimming with sharks in the Bahamas through this program for the Shedd Aquarium. And I remember just like sitting at the back of the boat and all these things are going through my head of like the Chicago news and me, getting mauled by a shark and my parents and what they thought. And I'm like sitting at the edge of the boat and you can actually see it in the picture at the top just like shaking. And part of me was like, but Deja, you love sharks. Like, you watch Shark Week every summer, you've seen Jaws a million times. And like sitting in that fear, I chose to jump in the water anyway. And this is a picture from my GoPro of me in the water with sharks. And it was the most insane experience, one of the most insane experiences of my life. And it's why I organized, because I like am fighting for my people, my community, but I'm also fighting for the sharks and the coral reef. And I've been coming back to that moment a lot just to remind myself that I'm able to move through my fear and I'm able to like act, and that like fear is a helpful emotion, but it is not something that it should be debilitating to me. And so I just wanted to share that a little bit because I feel like we're all experiencing immense amounts of fear in this moment. And we've overcome those moments of fear in the past, and we'll have to do that now for us to be able to fight for our country and our futures. So I went to a People's Action training a couple weeks ago in Virginia. 1,000 organizers from across the movement, different orgs, were coming together to figure out how we deal with Trump and the rise in fascism and authoritarianism. And the training was so impactful and incredible that I was like, I have to bring everything from that training to Sunrise. And so I'm just going to go over a couple concepts. I'll probably try to do this in like 7 minutes, and then we'll close this with just like opening and talking about some of the things that we're taking away. Some of the slides I'll go deep into, some of them I'll reference so that if you want to go deeper into them later. But they like provided a definition of authoritarianism. I think we like assume that people know what we mean when we say fascism, authoritarianism. I think it's helpful to like define the things, especially for like accessibility. And so have a definition of this. I won't read it aloud, but concentration of power, repression and threats are acts of violence. We see that coming through the administration right now. They talk about a couple things that authoritarians do. They like deploy the military domestically. Jacob just talked about how they're doing that with the National Guard in Portland and Chicago and LA and potentially, many other cities across the US. They give law or license to law breaking. They direct investigations after critics. We've seen this with Trump already. They do regulatory retaliation. They like laid out a pretty helpful framework of like, this is what an authoritarian does. And this was helpful for me because my brother, he's like a little capitalist. He's just like, you're being alarmist, Deja. This is not authoritarianism. And I'm like, the research says you're wrong. So helpful to like map out what do authoritarians do to sort of clock that against what Trump is doing right now. Are folks following me too? If you could just give like a thumbs up, thumbs sideways, helps me get a sense of if there are any questions. Okay, people are tracking a lot. So just a couple other things, what to expect. We don't have to expect that because we're living this. They like stoke fear and chaos to keep us off balance. They make threats to get people to obey in advance. Been doing this to colleges and universities, and they've been standing up, some of them. And they weaponize fear of subgroups to keep us divided. Helpful to understand their tactics so that we can like organize against them. And so out of this, the People's Action training sort of landed on like 4 facts or groundings that are helpful as we think about strategy and moving forward. The first is that, let's be real, the US is no longer a democracy. They call this an auto coup, which is, different from like a coup d'etat or a military-backed coup, where it's actually a coup that's happening as an elected official or president is in office, and he's sort of changing the rules of the game to set him up to be a dictator. The checks and balances that we had taken for granted have now been undermined. Supreme Court, what are y'all doing? And sort of other examples of the way that like the checks and balances in the system that were like meant to keep power in check is just ineffective. Yeah, there's like the role of the tech sector, thinking about Elon Musk and Doge in completely sort of unexpected ways. And then also we just have a pretty fragmented pro-democracy civil society. And I think you're seeing this, groups are starting to come together, but we don't really have a robust like pro-democracy movement in this country, which is really needed in the moment. Yeah, and keep dropping stuff in the chat. I'm gonna go through this, and if they're like major questions, stop me, but we'll answer them at the end. So takeaway from some of this is like, if authoritarian consolidation is to be stopped, millions of people must move from scattered resistance to disciplined, nonviolent, mass non-cooperation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looks like, what that means. Yeah, I'm going to scroll through some of this. 2 agitations that were made from the People's Action training that I want to bring into Sunrise is one about leverage. We want to move from persuading elites and relying on access to them for them to like, yield to our demands. And we want to move towards nonviolent non-cooperation and imposing political and or economic costs. not, the sit-ins, the like blockades of their campaign headquarters. That's cute, but like in this moment where we have a rising authoritarian, we actually need nonviolent non-cooperation and to impose costs on our target. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means. And then the second sort of agitation they made or pivot they recommend is moving from defining success as like, ooh, we have this many social media followers or this many members or this many press hits from our actions to how many people can we move towards a nonviolent action to get to the outcome that we seek. And ultimately, oops, it's like covering my thing. Oop, why can I see this? Oh, sorry. Share. That's so weird. Okay, yeah. Can you all see the screen? All my stuff disappeared.
We can see it.
Oh, great. Okay. Zoom technology. Yeah, and how do we actually move towards incurring costs on our targets? So, have folks heard of this concept called the pillars of power before? Let's see, let me share it again. My screen. There we go. Have folks heard of this? So they introduced this concept called the pillars of power. And this is so meta. This is strange. Why does this do this? Oh, there we go. Okay. And essentially, the pillars of power gets to the point that like no dictator or no authoritarian is, solely leading. There are many different entities and many different agencies that are sort of upholding their regime. You have civil service, you have the police and military, you have the media, you have labor, faith, business. And if you can get one or enough of these pillars to fall, the regime will crumble and fall. And there are like many examples in history of different sort of regimes, dictators, authoritarians who were toppled because people were able to effectively go after a pillar and make it fold. And yeah, maybe folks want to drop in the chat if you have examples of movements who have like toppled dictators by targeting certain pillars. Well, this like a really weird thing is happening. Give me a second. Okay, some folks are dropping things in the chat. Okay. There we go. So we talked about pillars, and then we went a layer deeper. And we talked about you have a pillar, but you also have layers within that pillar. And I think the biggest takeaway from this training is around strategy and getting sharper at like strategizing about who we're taking action towards. And so we did an example of ICE, whereas like there are many pillars upholding ICE. There's Avelo, the flight company that's like transporting people back and forth illegally. There's the car rental service that is giving, ICE cars when they go to these cities. There are many other institutions, and you want to think about which one of them are vulnerable and which can we actually sort of go after and attack. And this is like a teaser. We're going to launch a training to go deeper in this. That's 2 hours in a couple weeks in Sunrise, but I'm kind of like scratching the surface with some of this. Has anybody actually done this type of like campaigning research, targeting pillars and doing some of the mapping of it? Okay, some folks say ish. So I think there's a huge opportunity to like sharpen this as we think about how to defeat this dictator. Okay. A couple other things that they talked about. I think folks were asking Jacob questions this about Portland popular demands. We talked about how do you craft demands that like move people and bring people along and communicate what you're demanding or asking for. And a couple things you want to think about of like they speak to a larger problem in society. They're like resonant with the public. They are easy to understand. Kind of middle schooler understand this. I really like the like, does it hit every time? Like when I say like Black Lives Matter, Free Palestine, I'm like, I like feel it every time I say it. And so thinking about, they trained us on like, how do you craft and build popular demands? And I see Stephanie said, is a 32-hour work week an elitist demand? Interesting question. I might propose that I would sharpen the popular demand to be like a dignified life for all. That means time for rest, time for leisure, time for play. That's how, like, given how they train me, I would workshop the demand to make it more popular. Because, like, who's not against, more free time with your family? The other thing that they trained us on, and we'll do a fuller training on this in Sunrise, is moving from asking to winning. And this, they said, like the most successful organizing efforts in anti-democratic conditions was when groups imposed cost on vulnerable targets. And they talked about several examples, but the ones I want to pull forward are the Montgomery bus boycott. This was a boycott for over 381 days that actually impacted the bus system in Montgomery, Alabama. And because their pockets were being affected, they had to like come to the table and essentially desegregate the buses. Another example is, Jimmy Kimmel and Disney and people sort of canceling their Disney subscription and the sort of board or CEO undoing their decision because it was costing them. And so when we think about organizing under authoritarian conditions, we actually need to get sharper at like imposing or thinking about cost on the target. And some examples of how we do that, there are strikes, we could do boycotts, we do rent strikes, you can do slowdowns where like workers slow down their work and sort of decrease productivity so that people slowly start to feel it, but when they feel it, they really start to feel it. And then I'm gonna slowly, I think I'm nearing the end, but there's this quote from Ashley Henderson who's like, oh, organizing legend in my head. And they said that power concedes nothing without a demand, organized power, and a consequence. And it's the consequence to me that I really want us to think more deeply about organizing at Sunrise. How do we actually impose consequences for our targets? Whether it's, Tim Cook, Apple in the Bay, whether it's Wall Street in New York City, who we could target given sort of their complacency with the administration and things like that. So I'm gonna wrap this with some like spicy takes and then I'll open it up for questions and then we'll do some just like meaning making. What are you taking away? But there's an agitation that somebody made of like, the time calls for us to be powerful ass organizers. And I'm like, what your life will look like when you are 50 or 60 will depend on our ability to organize the hell out of people right now. And they said, if you could get 100 people to an event, you're an event planner. If you can lead a team, you're an effective project manager. But if you can move a base of people together to take collective action, you are an organizer. And what we need right now is a movement of organizers. That's going to get us to like, overthrowing this regime, stopping Trump. The next spicy take, though I love our social media and I think social media has a role to play, but social media hits not equate to the toppling of a dictator. Mass non-cooperation is what works and what will work in this case. And that I think in Sunrise we need to get significantly better at mass non-cooperation. And I don't think that means we like stop the moral protests, the direct actions, but I think we actually need to be thinking long-term about how we arc towards like real disruptive acts of mass non-cooperation. A couple other things, we need to give people something meaningful to do. I hear organizers sometimes talk about the general public of like, why are people sitting on the sidelines? Why is nobody doing anything about this? And I'm like, because we're not giving them something like sexy and exciting and meaningful to do. And people don't want to just donate. They don't want to just march. Like they want to feel powerful. And whether you're in Boston or Portland or Durham or the Bay, like we have to think about meaningful ways to pull young people into the organizing around this moment. And then I think the last thing I'll say is I think we also need to be clear on the vision of what we're building for when we talk about strikes in Sunrise. There is a guy, Ivan from Otpor, who shared like what strikes look like in Serbia. And it was like students started to strike. And then from there, it was like the retirees striking, and they were like throwing banners outside of their elderly homes. It was like, we're on strike. And then from there, it was like the small shopkeepers that said, we're closing shop. We're standing in solidarity with the students and the elderly and retirees. And then it was the taxi drivers, and then it was the bus drivers, and then it was everybody in society that's like, I'm done with this. I'm fed up. And I think we in Sunrise could paint a better picture of what does it look like when the students strike and then society strikes so that we can like get Trump out of office in 2028 and maybe sooner, depending on how he moves. There's some quotes here. I'll let you sort of marinate in them. But the last thing I'll say is like I opened this with courage, and we have a lot of ancestors to lean on. This is SNCC, the young folks who sat in lunch counters, who went into the South and faced like white supremacists who were lynching people, murdering people. And you have youth movements across the world in Nepal and Serbia and South Africa and Chile who like have stood up and toppled dictators. And sometimes I'm like, I don't know if we could do it. And then I like looked at history and I'm like, oh yeah, we as young people absolutely can. And okay, I am gonna close this with questions. Paul, is it okay if I kind of actually take it from here?
You got it. Keep
Great.
rolling. You're crushing it.
Great. Okay, I just want to wrap if there are any clarifying questions, and then I'll move us to a journal and then a short discussion in like 6 minutes of things that you're taking away. So yeah, any clarifying questions from some of what was presented? And that was a teaser. There's going to be a fuller 2-hour training that we roll out in a couple weeks to really bring people into the concepts a little bit more. And I see Tawny. Oh, when is that next training going to be? We're building the team to put it together. Ideally, it's like in 3 weeks. And I would love for you to be there in your whole hub. Other questions? Jared, ideally it'll be a mix of like MMT, so volunteers and staff. So we want to bring other people into leading it. And I think pull in some folks who've been organizing on the ground. Okay, I'm gonna invite us. This is what I'm gonna ask, everyone to lean in with me a little bit. Because this again is not a call to just talk. I think the hope of these community of practice spaces is to really ground people in what we're learning and like invite us to really go out and apply the learnings. And so I'm gonna ask everyone to just take 3 minutes to write the major thing that you're taking away or something that you want to bring back and apply to the organizing that's happening in your hub. Major thing you're taking away from this. This is not really a training. This is kind of like a call, community of practice. Major thing, like if you're gonna go back to your hub meeting and be like, ooh, I learned this thing on this call. What would that thing be that's most helpful? Oops, there we go. I'll like play some tunes for a minute.
Playback. Somebody accidentally deleted. Okay, thank you. Somebody accidentally deleted what we were. Please undo.
Oops, do we have somebody delete? Thank you, thank you. When a lot of people are working in Zoom, it gets a little tough. Okay, and I think the beautiful thing about the key takeaways page is that you can also use this as like the starting ground for if you want to go back to your hub, go back to your core team, you can sort of like pull some of these key takeaways that's sort of a synthesis of this community of practice call. But I see folks are talking about like cost, pillars of power, getting creative, we need mass non-cooperation, make the movement fun. I'm going to close us on next steps. And then I'm going to ask folks to give feedback on this because it's the first time we're doing this. And I know it's been like tight. We wanted to make it an hour and 15 minutes because we know many of you are busy. Would love your feedback on the timing. But Paul, if you could be prepared to drop the links in the chat, we have some asks for you.
Yep.
The first one is that the next community practice call is going to be on November 18th, Tuesday, same time. We're going to talk about the DC action that's going to have happened already. We'll debrief that. There'll probably be more sort of like hub highlights that we share. So if you could drop that, and I'm going to give you 20 seconds to sign up for it right now. And then we'd love to see you bring 2 more people from your hub so that they can, mesh in the learnings around anti-authoritarian organizing. So again, next community practice call is happening on the 18th in about a month. And maybe just drop a star in the chat once you've signed up for that already. I have signed up. I will be there because I am facilitating. And again, drop a star in the chat once you've signed up for that. Katie's coming. Katie, we'll see you in a month. Kaylee. Folks should have access to the slides. So I'll drop them again. And we'll send out an email or follow up. And you can share the slides with your hub. Great. Jacob is coming. I'll give folks 20 more seconds. I would go to the back end of the data right now, but I'm already a minute over and I want to keep us moving. Jared's coming. Cool. Jared, we'll see you. The next to us is we're planning a big action. We sort of have shifted, pivoted a little bit into anti-authoritarian organizing, and so we want to like embody that. So there's an action coming up in Florida. You can click the link that Paul is going to drop in the chat to learn more about that. But I will say this, I think a lot about integrity and like who I want to be and how I want to be in the world in this moment when it feels like the world is crumbling. And this is an opportunity for you to practice what you preach. So sign up for the Florida action. I think it's going to be really exciting and powerful. I know we're talking with indigenous groups, immigrants, right, justice groups in Florida, and it will be big. And then finally, if you're in the Northeast, we have a Northeast regional training that's happening November 14th through the 16th. We're going to train on this content. We're going to have a new sort of like updated strategy training. We're going to have a mass non-cooperation training, and then a base building and organizing under a dictator training that's using the strike pledge. How do you actually talk to people and move them to care about this? And so if you're on the Northeast, I don't think you have to be on the Northeast. You can also like get there. Highly recommend signing up for that training. And then the final request or ask that I have, I really value feedback, and I think we want to make these calls as like sharp, clear, and useful as possible. And so if you want to leave the call by giving us a request is that every person gives one, either plus or delta, of how do we like make these calls better so that we have 36 people at a point on the call today, that we get 70, and then 150 sunrisers, so that we're all actually building the power that's going to be necessary to prevent authoritarian consolidation in this country. So really appreciate everybody. If you could leave a piece of feedback, a plus or delta, and we'll send a follow-up email if you have other things that you want to share. Really encourage you to. But have a great night. Well, thank you all so much. I'll close us out with some of the music, and then Paul, maybe if Aru's here, if y'all could stay for like 3 minutes after.
Yep.
Cool. Okay, I'm gonna, let's see, well, nope, do not report. Cool. Okay, hi, Paul. We can do this in like 4 minutes. I've been writing feedback or just
Wait, I
reflection.
don't know who this other Paul is.
Oh, that's not you?
No.